In 1916, Evangeline Wilbur Blashfield established a fund to invite distinguished speakers to deliver formal addresses on the preservation, beauty, and integrity of the English language. The address has since evolved to be on any aspect of arts and letters. Past speakers include Helen Keller, E.M. Forster, Robert Frost, Wole Soyinka, and Edna O'Brien. This year's speaker provides eloquent testimony to the fact that however important we may consider the preservation, beauty, and integrity of the English language, even more important are the preservation, beauty, and integrity of our most basic rights. Ukrainian writer Andrey Kurkov is the author of 19 novels, including Grey Bees, which presents day-to-day life in Ukraine through the worldview of a beekeeper. And his most famous book, Death and the Penguin, in which, as we heard earlier, an aspiring novelist who makes ends meet by writing standby obituaries for a local newspaper, is taken aback to discover his subjects are being killed off by a mysterious organization. That the skewed world of Kurkov's imagination is perfectly aligned with and is a palimpsest for the real one accounts in part for the fact his work has been translated into almost 40 languages and published in 65 countries. I have run out of words for the horror of Putin's crimes in Ukraine, he wrote recently in The Guardian. Well, members of the Academy will be pleased to know that he hasn't quite run out of words, and we are so greatly honored to welcome him here and have him deliver the Blashfield Address of 2023, Andrey Kurkov.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very touched by this introduction. My text is not about English language. It's not my mother tongue. But it is about Ukraine because I am a Ukrainian, and as any Ukrainian, wherever he or she is, I'm starting my day checking the news, what is happening in Ukraine. And the nights are very short for me because, I got up at 3 o'clock in the morning, partially because of the jet lag, because I just came from Italy 2 nights ago. But mostly, actually, even if there is no jet lag, my heart and my thoughts are in Kiev, in other cities of Ukraine. In Kiev, first of all, because my family is there, my children are there, and they have to live under the constant bombardment. We had 10 days with missiles falling on Kiev every night. And I will not describe all the horrors in the text because, I wanted also, I actually sort of doubted to tell you or not to tell you the first headline at 3 o'clock in the morning, New York Times, which was 10 o'clock in the morning in Ukraine. And the first headline was that New York was shelled and 14-year-old girl was wounded with shrapnel. New York is a small town in Donbass named after your wonderful city. Please check the maps. It used to be a nice town with a literary festival there. So, we could go to New York Literary Festival without leaving Ukraine. I hope we will do it again in the future. But now it's about rain, snow, and ashes. The battle for Ukraine's collective memory. What do I remember about my early childhood? About the time when I could already hear and see the world around me, but could not reflect on it or describe it in words. A time when my vocabulary was limited to sounds that I used almost exclusively to draw attention to myself. I remember an old two-story wooden house with blackened walls. I remember a wooden staircase leading up to the second floor, the creak of the steps under adult feet. At least I think I remember that house, how it was so old that it sometimes wobbled perceptibly, but not enough to scare me. I was still wobbly myself. Did I confuse the building's instability with my own? Beyond the windows of this house, it rained constantly. Water poured down the window panes, blurring the world outside. At first, I could not understand what rain was. I thought the windows were crying, that they were the eyes of a house in pain. I spent the first 24 months of my life there, and I returned only a couple of times to visit my grandmother at the age of 4 or 5. One of these visits took place in the winter, when I found myself in a snow-laden village. The roof of the wooden house was covered with snow so that the house looked like a white-haired old man. The snow tried to hide everything dark and ugly, to give our eyes a rest, and to make the world appear more beautiful, cleaner, and kinder. Of course, I remember later moments of my life much more clearly, or think I do. But all too often when I reminisce out loud, my older brother or my wife will correct me. It wasn't quite like that. It was different. Yes, my personal memory makes no claim to objectivity. My memory is both documentary and artistic, like a book based on real events. My memory edits the story of my life. A country's collective memory can be a bit like that too. Significant events can be forgotten or misrepresented out of fear or ignorance or even out of love. Equally, a new generation can adopt and feel they own the collective memory of previous generations. The personal and collective memory that made my mother save every scrap of stale bread was the hardship she experienced as a child during World War II. I did not go through that, but I could not help adopting my mother's memory. I remember the cruelty of the local people in the village to which she and my grandmother were evacuated, who gave only potato peelings, and I remain careful not to waste food myself. Regular bombardments of Kiev are to blame for my new habit of checking the thickness of the external and internal walls of any building I enter. Here, in this beautiful church, I feel very secure. In Ukraine, I am, as everybody else, following the rule of 2 walls, which may at least prevent injury from flying glass. I'm sure my grandchildren will know this rule too, though they are yet to be born. Our collective memory affects how we think and act, impacting what happens today and how history will be written about tomorrow. All Ukraine is involved in the creation of new rooms in our collective memory, and not only Ukrainians. You too are involved. Your attitude, your support, your understanding, your practical and financial help are putting a positive stamp on Ukraine's collective memory. And this is something that makes me proud to become part of American Academy of Arts and Letters. Right now, the world is acquiring collective knowledge of Russian aggression in Ukraine. The depth of that knowledge, the clarity of the memory it stamps on us depends on the communities with which we are associated. I share a memory of this horror with at least 3 overlapping communities. The first is the largest. It is all the citizens of Ukraine, wherever they may be, a population that has agonized over the war since 2014, and since February 2022 must agonize on the run, under shelling, or hardest of all, under occupation. The second group is war-displaced people. I became one of them on the second day of the full-scale Russian invasion, when my wife and I left our apartment in Kyiv and drove to Western Ukraine in the opposite direction from the front line. 4 months later, I upgraded to the status of refugee in France. The experience of joining that community turned out to be no less dramatic and no less fascinating than the previous two. Last autumn, I managed to return to Kyiv and experience life under shelling. When I left Kyiv again, it was not as a fugitive from the war, but as someone who had a story to tell. I now realize that the Ukrainian collective memory has become one of the important energies in the struggle for our existence, for the independence of our country. It is like a living organism being fed every day with new information and experiences, mostly negative energy, but some sparks of brightness too. The experience of war determines national interests and national taste in literature and art. And even as in a Freudian experiment, it sets the themes of our dreams. It also pushes us into self-censorship of our words, thoughts, and even feelings. These side effects of the war also affect our collective memory, and doubtless some aspects will be challenged in the future, in a peaceful future. Ukraine's history is full of stories of fierce individualism and an unwillingness to blindly follow authority, and yet these stories are the rallying cry that has welded the population into a living fortress in which we stand united against the enemy. I cannot but ask myself how this fortress was constructed. What magic has brought a notoriously unruly population of individualists into a disciplined fighting force? And I am not talking about military, about the army. How many Ukrainians grew up treasuring the history of Ukraine's struggle for independence? How many of us shared in that collective memory? I, for one, did not. The old house I told you about was in Russia. My parents were Soviet people, their behavior shaped by the hardship of wartime life and the restricting pressure of the Soviet regime. Some 40% of Ukrainians come from this background. Until recently, few Ukrainians had any idea about Ukraine's history, especially about Russia's negative impact on Ukrainian culture and language. For both the Tsarist and communist regimes, Ukraine's independent spirit was a major threat, and both regimes did their best to undermine that spirit and to silence any mention of the policies they used to undermine it or the tragedies which resulted from those policies. No surprisingly, in 1991, independent Ukraine was born with collective amnesia. Since then, a truer picture of Ukraine's history has gradually appeared. Individuals and groups studied that picture and used their newly acquired knowledge to analyze the conflicting forces at work in Ukrainian society. After two revolutions and now this war, almost all Ukrainians have had an opportunity to compare the falsified history presented by Russia with other more reliable accounts. It seems that Ukrainians are clinging to this newly unearthed history, even those of us who are first-generation Ukrainians. We cling to it as if it were our own grandparents who were shot for dreaming about Ukrainian independence or starved to death for refusing to join a collective farm. This newly acquired understanding of Ukrainian history, the accuracy of which has been so demonically confirmed by Russia's current aggression, allows each Ukrainian to claim ownership of the fortress which is the country's collective memory. In the most recent works of Ukrainian artists, you may be upset to find that ruins and desolation predominate. You may find burnt out cars, murdered people, images of a previously happy life covered with ashes. Yes, this year, spring flowers are not a subject for Ukrainian artists. In Ukraine, the end of May is usually a time of thunderstorms and heavy pollen-filled green rains. Thunderstorms will frighten many Ukrainians for a long time to come, but rain will always be welcome. It washes away the superficial traces of recent atrocities, the blood and the ashes. These elements will blend into the soil, nourishing the plant life that will in turn nourish our future, indirectly feeding our love for our country. I hope that next winter's snow will cover some of the ugly signs of destruction, but that it will also decorate new buildings, bridges, and parks that are already appearing as Ukraine looks to the future. Do I look forward to next winter's snow? Not really. I look forward to this terrible war becoming history, to fixing in our collective memory the moment when peace returns to Ukraine, a tender wound alongside euphoria that will find a place in books and movies, in symphonies, paintings, and architecture. The memory of that moment will remain as a monument to the value of human life and freedom. Alas, the ashes of this war will also remain in Ukraine's collective memory for generations to come. This moment and the concern shown by American Academy of Arts and Letters in inviting me to give this address will give rise to other positive memories that can only strengthen Ukraine. Thank you very much.